Hi there, I'm Rachel Murphy. I'm the volunteer manager of the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, which is a partnership project with Plant Life, the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, and more recently the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs, Northern Ireland. And I plan just to give a brief overview here of scheme activity and data in its first 5 years, as well as an update of our activity and news from 2020. So just an introduction here, the NPMS is a UK-wide citizen science habitat-based plant monitoring scheme. It provides an indication of changes in plant diversity and abundance across the UK's habitats through time. With major changes taking place and declines in biodiversity across habitats being reported, it really is crucial to have a better understanding of plant populations, and there's a need for large-scale coverage and a systematic approach. So in 2015, the NPMS was launched following a comprehensive trial and development phase, making 2020 actually the 6th year the scheme has run and data has been collected. Across the UK, monads, or simply 1 kilometre squares, have been randomly designated, and volunteers the country over allocate themselves one or indeed more of these monads to monitor biannually as part of the scheme. Looking at what the data can tell us, the scheme aims to provide habitat inventories and contribute to remote sensing. The aims also include investigating drivers of change, considering, for example, climate change, habitat management, pollution and eutrophication, pests and pathogens, and so on. In short, the scheme aims to establish national trends, to monitor the impact of management, to support and enable improved reporting against stakeholder objectives and work plans, to provide UK and country biodiversity indicators, to track progress against national strategies and plans, to add value and augment other data sets. For example, monads can be monitored for both plants and pollinators to get direct relationships in data trends. And the scheme really provides a great balance between providing robust, standardised data to meet required data standards, while also employing a methodology that is simple, repeatable, and ultimately achievable by a wide group of volunteers. So in spring this year, we hit really a pivotal milestone and celebrated the first 5 years of data collection from 2015 to 2019. This comprises 5 years of quality data on plant communities nationwide, data to develop a national indicator of habitat quality, 5 years of government-funded research and excellent partnership working, and 5 years of citizen scientists monitoring wild plants and their habitats. And importantly, and excitingly actually, we reached the stage whereby we now have enough data to start looking at trends and indicators. That really is thanks to a huge volunteer effort in this time and across all survey levels. The NPMS database now holds over 150,000 plant records of around 1,500 species, equating to around 60% of the entire native flora of the UK recorded just in that time. Monitoring the NPMS habitat plots twice a year, every year, really provides an unparalleled opportunity to track and understand the responses of plants to our changing environment. It allows us to investigate the growing pressures on our environment from, say, eutrophication, climate change and extreme weather, and how land management can affect biodiversity. And as I say, following our 5th season of surveys, we started to see stories emerge from the data. And if you've not seen our report, Understanding the Health of Our Habitats, released in March this year, you can read the report in full and find out a bit more about the partners we're working with on the conservation and research page of the NPMS website, with some emerging stories on our blogs page as well on the website. Some stories emerging from the data include the opportunity to track and understand the response of plants to extreme weather events such as droughts, for example those we experienced in the summer of 2018. The NPMS data showed indications of increase in bare ground and an increase in the abundance of species that are better at tolerating these stresses, such as, for example, salad burnet and wild thyme. Certain orchid species are also being recorded in ever more northerly locations. That's another indicator of warming climate. The MPMS data are also starting to provide evidence of the fertile nature of many UK plant communities, and monitoring key indicator species such as nettles and cleavers can provide evidence of the effects of eutrophication or nutrient enrichment and its impact on species intolerant to nitrogen, and it provides useful information for comparing habitats. So, for example, MPMS data suggests that species of fertile environments are on average 2.5 times more likely to be found in deciduous woodlands than those of infertile environments. However, the opposite seems to be true of dry heathland environments and blanket bogs. The MPMS is the only citizen science project that allows us to see how the most invasive species, such as rhododendron, Himalayan balsam and sycamore, seen here, are interacting with native plant biodiversity across Britain and Ireland. Habitats invaded by the highest number of aliens were arable field margins, hedgerows and dry deciduous woodlands. And this information can allow scientists to understand more about the impacts of non-native species upon native biodiversity and how these might change under changing climate. Ultimately, detailed records of plant communities are extremely valuable for understanding how plants interact with each other under our rapidly changing environment. So following the spring launch and our 5-year celebration this year, obviously the year took quite the turn for all monitoring schemes and indeed all of us, everyone. And while surveys were paused temporarily in spring and early summer, and even later in some areas where regional restrictions were applied, the MPMS were really keen to maintain engagement with our volunteers and ensure we were still providing training opportunities and support. So just a whistle-stop tour here of some of the scheme's activities during that tricky 2020 season. For the first time, MPMS developed a weekly online training programme through the season, and that was on a variety of themes from methodology to habitat-specific ID, and it was housed on the MPMS website. These materials released each week included learning aims and outcomes record, themed presentations and supporting materials, and these are now evergreen content and they remain on the website. All materials are publicly available, but accompanying these themes, we also ran live training sessions for MPMS volunteers. These virtual training sessions on each theme for just MPMS volunteers were really well received actually, and participants fed back that not only were they useful for personal development and training, but it actually helped them to keep up engagement with the scheme and really feel connected with the volunteer community. I think it was just lovely to actually see some lovely enthusiastic smiley faces at this really odd time. We also held a number of data surgery sessions to replace support drop-in sessions. And we held a series of regional volunteer virtual meetings that volunteers booked onto for their particular areas. And in most cases, this gave the opportunity to speak with a regional mentor, as well as myself, and really meet other volunteers in their area in a COVID-secure and less formal way, and to build that community feel. We've also encouraged and seen more activity and greater numbers on our MPMS support closed Facebook group for volunteers. It's become a lovely hub of volunteers to connect with each other, ask questions and provide each other with advice and support. We also developed and ran our first big online quiz for volunteers, and as well as being interactive and a fun activity for our volunteers to engage in, it really complemented learning with the correct answers and rationale provided, for example, rather than just say providing a score at the end. We've seen over 170 participants from an even spread of surveyor level and time with the scheme. So it's actually provided a really useful initial quality assurance tool to help us understand how well volunteers at different levels and with experience in different habitat types are doing with their identification of indicator species, and possibly help us to identify training needs. So overall, we have been very busy online this summer, and we've reached a large number of volunteers, new and experienced. As a result, thankfully, we've managed to continue to build and support our volunteer community nationwide. This year, we've recruited around 250 new volunteers, and well over 300 MPMS survey squares have been allocated. Completely as expected for such a difficult year, with important restrictions in place for the health of our members, we have seen a reduction in the number of squares for which data has been returned this season, but actually we're still seeing perhaps more than we initially expected, with data from over 220 squares already being submitted thus far this year, and they're still coming in. And this is really helping us to see an overall increase in the total number of squares in the MPMS database with data submitted nationwide. Another extremely positive outcome for the MPMS in 2020 was last month. The DEFRA and JNCC UK biodiversity indicators were published, and these provide an annual view of how a variety of groups of wildlife and other indicators of action for biodiversity conservation have really fared across the UK in recent years. The 2020 launch includes something extra special really for MPMS volunteers, because it marks the first ever contribution of MPMS data to a national biodiversity indicator. Specifically, MPMS data from 4 of the scheme's best surveyed broad habitats have been used to create a new indicator for category C7, which is plants of the wider countryside. The indicator is still classified as an experimental indicator, and future work is expected. However, just getting to this point in only 6 years of field surveys really highlights the incredible dedication of the MPMS volunteers in getting out into the countryside, establishing and surveying their habitat plots in order for us to understand the changes of our environment and the quality of the data that they're providing. So to find out anything more about the National Plant Monitoring Scheme, please do visit our website at mpms.org.uk. We can also be found on Facebook and Twitter. And of course, for inquiries, please don't hesitate to contact support@mpms.org.uk. Thank you ever so much.